Hi, journeyers. It's Leslie Neese, your host for Honoring the Journey. And today we're honoring a journey of a Gary Mai. And Gary is super cool. Like, he actually sent me a little introduction email, told me a little about his story, and it was so relatable and so beautiful that I was like, oh, he needs to be on the show. So, Gary Mai is a podcaster. He is also in the LGBTQIA community, been married for what, 5 years, Gary? Is that right?
Yeah, this is our 6th year now. Yeah, yeah.
Woo-hoo. Cheers.
Crazy.
And, you're our Canadian friend. You might
I
be an
am. I
American.
am your younger brother. Yeah, could be your 51st date. I don't know. You know what? I would prefer to take Montana down to California and pull you guys up or
Hey, we'd be
be,
happy because 'cause I'm in
do something
Utah.
that way.
I would
Oh,
love.
okay.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
that'd be amazing. We'll see what
Decision,
happens. I
the
know,
Gulf
right?
of America. Anyway,
Yeah.
so anyway, Gary's here to share his story, and before we get started, Gary, I always like to sort of just, like, get to know you as a person. So my question for you this morning, kind of an icebreaker, if you will. Do you watch TV much?
I do. Yeah,
Do you? Do you and your husband like to binge watch anything or
all the time.
okay, what's your current binge?
Current binge is Lioness. We just finished that. We did the 2 seasons of it, and I
Yeah.
absolutely loved it.
Yeah, that was good.
Yeah, I love a good crime thriller action binge for sure.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. So what's the most embarrassing one that you've ever binge watched? You're like, "Oh, I hope nobody
I don't
catches me
know.
doing
I
this."
actually don't know. Aaron, my husband and I, we have 2 different profiles on Netflix. So if you open up his one, his is all documentaries and politics and true crime, and I am after school special. Like
You need a pretty bow at the end.
yeah,
Okay.
I need to have yeah, it's so weird. Like he's like, "Yeah, we're not gonna be watching that. We're not gonna be watching that." Yeah, I don't know. I definitely do watch kind of one of those like, mid-teenagers, high school stuff that I'm out too old for watch, but yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Love it. Hey, listen, we all have we all have our likes and dislikes. And a
Yeah,
lot of it, I don't know, maybe it takes you back to a time in your life that was fun or it was
maybe.
lighter.
Yeah,
I find that sometimes when I watch like older shows, like
yeah.
the Brady Bunch or whatever, I'm
I
like,
think it's kinda like that too. It's something that my mom and I used to share actually. She used
oh,
to do the whole rom-com, and we would watch these, like, really cheesy comedies and girly flicks, and she'd be like, "Oh, we're having a girls' night in?" I'm like, "Yeah, but I'm not a girl, but yes."
that's so fun. Yeah.
Yeah, so I think that's
Very
where that comes
cool.
from.
Well, thank you, Gary. I appreciate
Mm,
that. So let's talk about your journey. I don't even quite know where to begin, but I just want to know, I guess from the beginning,
yep,
where were you raised? What was that like? Were you raised in church? What
yeah.
was your family like?
So my mom's South African and my dad's German, and, my dad is in the Navy and went down to Cape Town, South Africa, where he met my mom, and then I was born just outside Johannesburg shortly after that. They got married, and kind of fast forwarding into it, I grew up mainly in the Okanagan in the western side of Canada in British Columbia. My parents had taken over a family hotel. And yeah, so I'm South African. First language is German, run a German passport, live in Canada. So it sounds like a
You're
Jason
kind of
Bourne
a
movie.
mutt. I love
Yeah,
it.
yeah, yeah. So it
We
depends on
can't
who
put
asks
Gary in a
me.
box. Yeah,
Yeah,
don't do
yeah.
it.
No, no. So yeah, that's kind of what happened. My life began in my first memories were in Canada.
Really?
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
interesting.
on the West Coast
Wow.
and in a little
So,
town called Penticton, which is like we call the Florida of Canada.
oh, you guys
Yeah.
have a Florida? Is it
Well,
humid and hot?
it's humid and hot for I would say like 9 months of the year. It is actually quite
Mm.
arid. It's a semi-desert area, like they have cacti that
Wow.
grows.
Okay.
But
Awesome.
we do have snow there, so it's not completely Florida, but that's
Yeah.
where all our old seniors go to retire and,
Oh,
enjoy
that's
life.
cute.
Yeah.
And that's where you live or that's where you lived?
That's where I lived. So now currently I live on the other side of the Rockies, just east of the Rocky Mountains in a city called Calgary in Alberta.
Calgary. That just sounds
Yes.
so stoic.
It's kind of and then we always liken everything to the States. So Calgary in Alberta is like the Texas of Canada.
Uh,
We are
so
all like
everything's big in
farmland
Calgary.
and it is.
Mhm.
Everything's big in Calgary. Exactly.
You
Yeah.
have belt buckles and cowboy hats and
We do. We do.
ranches.
Which is beautiful, but it does bring its challenges, living an LGBTQ plus life here.
Oh,
Very
yeah, I'm sure.
conservative. The church is very conservative, so it's kind of a different angle. Yeah, we do have what they call the Alberta advantage because everything's bigger and in quotes better,
Mhm.
um, but only if you're on the right side of the better.
Boy, isn't that so like America?
Yeah,
Um,
yeah, very much so.
so that had to be challenging. Let me tell me, like, back me up. When did you start to
Yeah,
realize that, uh-oh,
yeah, where my life
um,
was kind of changing a little bit.
yeah, yeah.
So it actually stems as a kid. One of my first memories, I was a victim of a sexual abuse,
Mm,
and it was quite horrific. It was without getting into too much details, a very pivotal point in my life when I was very young. It was kind of where my, excuse me, my first memory started. And I remember my very first lie that day. I remember my very first cover up that day. I remember the superpower that what I now recognize was being installed. It was almost like there was like this something was taken away and something was given to me in the sense of like I can now recognize intuition and what was going to be, my, I guess, what would help me out would be my shield when I'd go into life and everything would kind of happen. I would always kind of revert back to that and be like, well, ooh, I recognize that. I'm not going to do that. Kind of an
mhm,
intuition base. So my life was very singular on my own, taking care of my little brother, while my immigrant parents were working and trying to make a living. Um, yeah, then it kind of went into one trauma into the next. So my life started out pretty rocky, but it was weird. Right after that, I was given back my childhood. I still remember magic. I still remember being happy. Still remember the Christmas times, and I remember like God in my life as a very young kid. I used to play on the piano, so when I would feel really off, I didn't play the piano well, and I still don't, but I would, like, as a kid, just kinda, like, hit the keys and then sing along and then just kind of do my own little worship as a kid, and that would be my escapism, and I
oh,
just remember God just being there in my life at those times. Um, Going through life and my sort of next trauma, my mom had an abusive relationship, and my mom packed us kids up, and then we went to Calgary. That's how I landed here, and, shortly afterwards, my dad followed up, and then there must have been terms and conditions on my mom's side. And so we started to then attend a church, which was very conservative. And I remember being in Sunday school, getting all the stars, remembering all like the Bible verses and all the memorization games, and I very fond memories of my life. But I also remember the rigidness of it all too, and the
mm,
fear that I had of God. And when I was baptized at age 13, because now I'm a teenager and I am accountable. And if I, don't ask God into my life or accept Jesus into my heart, I could go to sin if I died tomorrow. So that was a
oh,
real fear, right?
oh, to
Yeah. So
hell,
that
yeah.
was, yeah,
Mhm,
right. And
mhm,
it's funny because I carried this all through my life. And up
mm.
until recently, on one of your podcasts, you spoke to, yeah, yeah, I was listening to it, I was at the gym, and I have a whole, like everyone does, a whole list of podcasts, and you're a part of my sort of matrix, and so, like,
Oh,
you came on and you were speaking to this lady, and you were talking about what if hell isn't real, or she didn't believe that hell is real and that it's like a fear-based thing that's for manipulation, and it could have
mhm.
been something that's made up, and I was like, "Huh, well, that just changes my day." And I had to, like,
And
like
my life and my
and my
perspective
life and my
and
perspective and all of
yes,
it. And I was
yeah,
actually really excited about it, nervous, scared,
of course, yeah,
because it's like you and all your other guests on your podcast are talking about deconstructing. It's a process, right?
yeah,
And it's kind of a 2 steps, sometimes 3 steps back, 1 step back, and you're just kind of stumbling,
mhm,
um, but kind of feeling forward is what I like to call it. But I just I remember the very first time that I questioned everything was when I was engaged to my girlfriend at the time before I'm now with my husband, and her family was really involved. So we, again, long story. So we were in Canada, left in 1997, went back to South Africa. I lived in Cape Town, studied in Cape Town, took my degree to London, UK. And all along the way, I became a part of the Hillsong Church, became a part of the Vineyard Church.
Oh,
and I was
wow.
really, yeah, really seeded into
What were
it,
you
and
doing? Did you volunteer or
I did, yeah, I was a part of the, orphanage side of things there, and
Mm.
a part of a orphanage called Lanawa, which means one blood, Christ's blood, and, they became family, and shortly after becoming a part of that church, my mom had passed away,
Oh, I'm
and sort of
sorry.
in between, yeah, it was kinda one of those things that had to happen in order for my life to move forward. My
Mm.
mom and myself, we were really close, and I was really connected with her, and I was living in the UK, and I was planning to come back home to South Africa, and, again, in the conservative church, and I was with this girl, and the church was like, You've been dating this girl for 5 years, you have to get married, you have to get married. You're living in sin, and you're in the same house together." And I was like, the whole culture of you date to marry, and I was like, "Well, I like her," but I still had this sort of undercurrent of attraction to same sex. So I would see a good-looking guy, and I'd be like, "Okay, this is awkward." I'm like, "I do love my girlfriend, and I love our relationship." Um,
And
but
you
it
even had an attraction to her, I'm sure.
absolutely,
So that
and
is confusing, I bet. Like,
right?
wait a
And
minute.
because your whole life, I was harder on myself than I
Mm.
was allowing people to be hard on the LGBTQ plus community. It was more about me thinking, "Well, if I come out, God's not gonna accept me." That's what I've been told.
Yeah.
Um, Number 1. Number 2 is, do I accept myself? Because I've been so sheltered and in such a hatred way that I was extreme, where I was like, I can't do that. And my perspective of what being gay looked like was, well, now I'm going to be, out there, and there's going to be this gay scene, and there's going to be a lot of, in and out. And that was not who I am. And even in a straight relationship, I'm not one of those guys that was out there to just to like, date a whole bunch of girls and,
Yeah.
put a notch on the belt sort of thing,
Right.
without better wording on that. But yeah, super confusing. Anyways, broke up with her and moved back to South Africa. And
Was
got
it because
and
of this, or was it because of your same-sex attraction? Is that why you broke up?
no, my mom, well, the reason why we broke up was because I didn't know where I was. I remember on being on a train coming from work one day, and I saw this family, beautiful family with a little kid. And I was just asking God, I'm like, okay, Lord, I want kids. I love kids. I think I'd be a great father. But should I have a child with my girlfriend at the time? And it was like a hard no. And it wasn't like an audible voice. It was just something inside me that was like a switch. And I was like, okay. And I went home that night, and she was cooking. And I remember like walking into the living room, and I sat her down, and I was like, I can't anymore. And she's
Mm.
like, so at that time I started to go online and started to like look at like different things. And so she's like, I've seen some stuff. And I
Mm.
was like, well, I'm just experimenting. I don't know if this is something that I'm attracted to, or if it's a product of my sexual abuse as a kid from a man that might
Mm.
have muddled up my whole first sexual experience in life. And maybe I'm just need to figure that out.
Yeah, oh, that
And
is such a great point because I do think a lot of people I remember when I was in evangelicalism, I don't mean to
yeah.
interrupt you, but
No,
when
no, I like great. Yeah.
I really believe that if you were a homosexual, it's because you were abused as a
Yeah.
child. That's
That's
what we're told.
exactly what I thought too.
And
Yeah.
so, yeah, so I was like when you said I had abuse, I went, "Oh, crap.
Yeah.
People are gonna immediately think that." But so, did you get therapy about this? Did you talk to someone to
Not until recently, no. So my whole
really?
entire life, I was too afraid to even bring it up.
Mm.
I knew the day that it happened. I remember the police officer put me up on, because the police were involved as well. So it was
Oh,
we lived
wow.
in on the border of Washington is where this town is of Canada. And that's a very transient sort of location. So a lot of people from the States come up as well, and they come that way to go to Alaska. So there's a lot of people that come up that are a little bit unsavory. And this
Mhm.
guy was a known child offender, and the police were chasing him, and they were notified that he was in Canada. And it's all sort of narrowed down to this event that day. And I
Wow.
remember that police officer putting me up on the counter of the front desk. Like, we had those old, it was a motel, right? So it's an old room, the little bell over the door, it dings as you go in, and it's got like, a front desk. And
Yeah.
so the two officers are in there, and he puts me up on the table, and he says to me, he's like, you know, "Gary, do you recognize this man?" I'm like, "Yes, I do." And then he's like, "Did he touch you in any way?" And I remember looking directly at my father. And to this day, I'm not a good liar. And I remember looking at him, and I'm like, you know that I'm lying. But the way it was so fast that he groomed me, abused me, and then threatened to kill my parents and my mom specifically. So it was very quick, right? So like at a very young age, I'm like, well, I'm not going to say anything because like I believed it all, right?
You were afraid he was gonna kill your parents.
100%, especially my mom. He's like, yeah,
This
because
is
he got
so
into this.
horrible. How old were you again?
Oh, I was 7. It
Oh,
was it
stop.
was, one of my very impressionable times, but, it's funny how I was saved in my childhood to still be able to have the magic and the laughter. It only came to me a little bit later, like in high school, when I started playing rugby and started doing all the things, and all I wanted to do was dance. And I was like, maybe I would, like, do choreography, and I would have a lot more girlfriends than I had guy friends, and I would question all that sometimes. And then, there was the jock guy that I was like, "Oh, he's kinda good looking," and I'm dating the cheerleader girl. I was that guy.
Mhm.
So it was a major cover up my whole entire life, right up into the point where when I moved back to South Africa, I was with no relationship. My mom passed away, and I remember at that point, the very first time thinking to myself, "Do I wanna live like this for the rest of my life, or do I wanna turn out the
Mhm.
lights?" So, a lot of self-medication, drugs and alcohol, which led into addiction, being addicted to crystal meth, getting
What?
caught. Yeah. And so
Wow.
I would go to a squatter camp in Africa, which is called a shebeen, which is a one-stop shop for drugs, alcohol, and whatever else you want. And just use your imagination. And there's sort of a roller gate, and you get to the gate, and then you ask for however much you want. $10 for a little straw, which would get you high for 24 hours. It was ridiculously cheap
Oh my gosh.
and dirty and dangerous, and you never know what you're gonna get.
So
And
and you found yourself in this place, you were because you think you were just running from your truth.
100%. I started
Oh,
doing that at 17 already, binge drinking, partying, and just I remember telling my mom in one of the gas stations. We went down to the Esso gas station down by our house at the time. And I called my mom that day specifically because I was in so much pain, and I remember laying in bed as a young guy crying and asking God to take this yearning, or like this feeling of not belonging. I loved the church, loved my parents, I loved worship. Um, and I had this fear reverence of God that if I like say to God, "Hey, I think I'm gay," would he then leave me? And then where do I go from here now? Like, and that was my biggest deterrent. So I started out, got in the car with my mom. We drove down to the gas station, and I said to her, "Hey, do you remember that time when I was a kid when we were in the motel?" And she's like, "Yeah." And I told her, I'm like, "Look, I was abused. I'm 17 now, and I'm struggling. Like I don't
mhm.
know if it's, because of that, but I don't know where I fit in on if I'm straight, bisexual, if I'm gay. I don't know. I'm just really confused." And she's like, "Well, that was a very long time ago." And in those 90s, parents didn't have the tools. And
Yeah.
my mom was right by the church. Like she was the, Sunday school teacher. She was there. We were church, like, you know very well. Wednesdays, Thursdays, New Year's Eve, we were sitting in the pews, Christmas Eve, like that
Whenever
was
the
our
door's
life.
open.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And
yeah.
um that was the first time I ever kind of spoke about questioning it. And it was like, wow, that was a long time ago. And I was like, oh, wrong answer. So I just buried it under the carpet. We all buried it under the carpet.
So you
And
never talked to her about that again?
no, right after that, we moved to South Africa pretty quickly. And then our life changed, and she overcompensated in all the ways, which was, she was more present in our life. She was really loving on us. She allowed us to be who we wanted to be, and she became this person that was very open and soft and loving, whereas before was really hard in Canada for her. Um, yeah, and then so she passed away, and in all these times, and even in the church, I never really I knew God, I knew the Bible. It was all very textbook, and I never really felt that tingling feeling that everyone like talked about. Like we grew up in the church too, where the Holy Spirit would just come over you, and pastors would put their hand on you, and they'd fall over. And I just one time I went up to the church to kind of go and get like the devil out of me, because this has got to be the devil in me. And the pastor comes up and is pushing on my head. I'm like, not falling over. I'm like, no, I'm like, I don't feel it. This isn't for me. And so then I like kinda left, and then, like I said, my mom passed away, and I remember just feeling so alone, and there was a lot of things that went on, and I remember going to bed one night, and I asked God to just let me see her one more time. And
Mm.
it's God wasn't always in my life, like, constantly every single day. I mean, I practiced it, I went to church, I would do all the things, but in the times when I really needed him in these senses, it was like he exposed himself, and this wasn't a dream where my mom came to the UK when I was living there in my dream, and I was showing her around. She'd always be like, "Oh, Gary." She was very proud of me working in the bank, and I was a financial manager, and I was doing really well, and, she's like, "I'm so happy for you, and I'd love to come out and see the London, and we can go and, like, get, like, a Cornish pie and everything else," and, lovely, and we would talk every day, and we became best friends, and, like, very candid talk except for my sexuality, and as long as I was talking girlfriend, marriage, kids, grandchildren, she was very much on that, um, but as she passed away, like I said, in that dream, we're walking around, I'm showing her all the sights, we're with my brother and my dad, and we see this church, and it's got, like, a steeple, stairs going up, the old typical type of church with a little
Oh, yeah.
foyer in the front.
Mhm.
So we walk up the stairs, and there's a choir inside the church, and it's beautiful. And I remember it's just like this dream was like it follows me, like it's like my thing. And I said to her, I'm like, "Wow, that's gorgeous." And she's like, "Yeah." She's like, "I've heard better." She's like, "You just wait." And it's all this whole thing about like when you enter the pearly gates and like, the worship and everything else. Yeah. So as you can imagine, so the pews are down the church and then, the aisle down the middle and then the pulpit's at the front, right? Like a typical old church. And the windows on the sides have stained glass. So as the sun's coming through, it's kind of creating like an orange hue. And along the windows on the side is just a table and everyone's having a potluck. So this is in the dream
Mm.
and very peaceful. And we're walking around, and this one lady comes up. She's like, "Oh, you're Gary. Yo, your mom talks about you all the time." And so I'm going around, I'm meeting all the people, and the conversation's very lovely and very casual. And everyone's like, "So good to see you and finally see your face." And your mom just, well. And all of a sudden, the roof lifts off this church and slams back down. And I flinch and I drop to the ground. And I look around, and nobody around me else seems to be bothered. And it does it again. And I'm like catching a fright every time. And I like get up and I look at my mom, and she's like, "Don't worry." She's like, "As long as your heart's within the four walls of a church, you'll always be safe." And I said to her, I'm like, "Are you okay?" And she's like, "I'm okay." And she pointed outside, and she had a miscarriage, and she's like, "I'm with her." And I'm like, "Oh,"
Mm.
I'm like, "Okay, that's beautiful."
Wow, what a dream.
Yeah, right? And then again, and then so when I was naughty as a kid, my mom would bring me coffee because 'cause I'd be out drinking and partying, and so she'd bring me coffee, put it beside my bedside table. She'd sit there, and she would kinda wake me up and be like, "Hey, Gary, get up." And then when she would get up off the bed would kind of shift a bit. It would have like a
Mhm.
as if someone's getting off the bed. And when I woke up, I had that same feeling of the bed, and I knew that
Oh,
she was there. Yeah, it was this
mm.
crazy sort of encounter.
Well, and
And then
how do you reconcile that with the beliefs of the church? Do you know what I
right,
mean? Like,
you know? And then so if you fast forward now, I moved to Canada, get engaged to the pastor's daughter, who is a part of a very big evangelical movement here in Canada and is the CFO and CEO of the Miracle Channel. And there's a lot of like influence and right up front center. And we're in the church and, it's big production. We're on TV and there's all that sort of stuff going on between Calgary and Winnipeg. And we have like the green room and all the people that are very like influential even in the states as speakers and pastors are coming up and back and forth. And so in the whole production of the church is when I felt the furthest away from God that I'd ever felt. And
oh,
I thought that if I was to marry the pastor's daughter, that would be the closest I should be feeling to God and would make my mom really happy. So I was doing all that. And so her and we were going through marriage course, and then we just had a bit of a tiff. It wasn't even too big. And I just, again, just felt like I just can't do this. I can't pretend to be something I'm not. I can't get into this world because I don't belong there. And I and
well,
it,
you
it
were doing exactly what you did in South Africa with your
yeah,
ex-girlfriend. Yes, trying to
100%, right?
live the
Trying to
life.
like
You were really
live a
trying to
life.
push this into your life. Yeah, that's
It was
hard.
really hard on trying to not lose God and trying to impress my mom and all of it. And I remember like the pastor also saying when my mom passed away that she didn't believe enough. That's why she died. And just like all of this crazy stuff. So the church
Sorry,
was
but
just
we all
throwing me.
die.
Yeah,
100% mortality rate.
Yeah, so she had an illness, but if she didn't, have complete faith, she could have been healed and redeemed from it. And I was just like, all of that crazy stuff that went on, and I just, continued to kind of walk through the church with a lot of confusion and pain and like a lot of questions, but like afraid to ask them without being kind of considered, well, maybe there's something else going on. And if I ask the questions, maybe they start unpacking it and they find out that I have gay tendencies. So I'd rather just kind of just conform. And then when I broke it off with her, I kind of went into a 3 month of just like on my knees, crying, not feeling God, feeling God. And at the very end of it, God was like, okay, why are you always asking me for the same thing? I created you the way that you are. I love you for who you are. I met you. Stop asking me for something that I've already given you, you know? He's like, I'm yours. You're here and I'm happy and I love you and just be. And I still doubted it and I kept on going. But when I ended up meeting my husband, we were dated for 5 years, got married. And in the last 2 years, we attended a church that's an affirming church. And as true as God is, that church on the inside was a church that we attended as a kid with my mom for New Year's 1 year. And it looks exactly like the same church that was in my dream. And I didn't even know it until they had taken these wood panels off of the light of the windows. And there's an orange hue that came in because they were doing renovations. They're like, sorry, we're going to be changing this up because they have this changing around.
Wow.
And then they had the pews and then they took out the pews. And I just remembered, I said to Aaron, my husband, I'm like, that dream I told you? I'm like, this is the church. And it was about being in the church and accepted for who I am. And I was like, okay, here we are. Now I need to deconstruct.
Wow. That's
Yeah.
powerful. And I
Yeah.
mean, what an experience to literally ask God, can I just see her one more time? And he'll
Right.
give you that gift of a dream. I've had those dreams before where as soon as you wake up, you're like, I need to write this down because this meant something.
Yeah. I
And
believe in
it
dreams.
always meant something.
Yeah.
And so I have no doubt that,
No.
I mean,
And
that was a
that's what
clue
I
for
saw
you.
too. And I didn't and when I first felt that dream, I was like, I felt rigid. I was like, well, I don't want to be in the walls of the church that I know. Like, I can't. I don't believe some of the things that they say. I know that, in quotes, everyone is welcome, but only if you are not
Fill in the
gay.
blank. Yeah.
Yeah,
Basically, yeah.
right?
Or you're
Yeah,
welcome and you can attend and you can tithe, but you can't
exactly.
serve, you can't, work with children.
No.
It's so
Yeah, it's really hard. It's a tough place, and it was a
but they're not
lot.
like that at this church.
No, it's not,
Mhm.
and it's funny that that was what the church in my mind, in my dream was. It was a church that accepts me for who I am. And they're open about it and they have resources and you are a part of the church and you can do your thing. I In all honesty, I don't go all the time because I still have a couple of things I'm still working through and I have to still figure out yet. I don't think that my deconstruction, my backpack isn't quite as light as it should be. But running into your podcast has made me do things that I wouldn't have done without it. So I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you for that. That means a lot to me. And I'm
Yeah.
so glad because, I do. I sit here and I talk to people and I hear their stories and I'm just like, please, just like, even if one person
Yeah.
can just hear this and see that it's okay that we see things different, that we live different ways, that, it's like a lot of the things that we've been taught are truth should be questioned.
Mhm.
And it's not that that's a bad thing. And I'm not trying to tear the church down. I'm
No.
trying to build the people up who are
Yeah.
leaving
Yeah.
because it is very lonely and it's very scary.
Mhm.
And it doesn't have to be. There's no fear in perfect love, you
No,
know?
and that's the thing, right? And it's not that, a lot of us leave the church because it wasn't a bad experience.
Right.
It just we didn't feel completely whole or connected to, what our real purpose is and, having to do the rituals and have to do religion, which is definitely not what Jesus was about when he was here. And but having to practice that today in order to see Jesus just for me was my biggest thing. I was like, why are we in religion when he fought against religion? I was just like, what? Like, that's
Eh,
my first
yes,
question.
I know, like, didn't he say his harshest words to the religious people? Like,
Yeah.
and yet we've made him into another religion, several hundred probably if you
Oh,
if you
I
really
know.
look back at it. And everybody sees it different and everybody thinks they're right. So,
Yeah.
to
And
me, yeah, I get angry sometimes because I believe religion tries to sell us something that we already have. Well,
yeah,
first they convince us we don't have it, and then they try to sell us the thing that we already have, which is our connection to source, to
yeah,
God. And when you're convinced that you don't have that connection, it's very difficult to live a fulfilled life because you feel like, "Oh, I need to do these things
yeah.
in this way in order to connect with the source." And it's just not true.
No, and it's all a manipulation, I feel.
Mhm.
Again, same thing you I don't wanna talk bad about the church
Yeah,
or talk
yeah.
about specific people, but for me, this is my opinion, and I see that a lot of it is controlling, it's
Mhm.
fear-based, and it's a lot of misinterpretation of what the Bible is actually really saying because it was convenient for people in politics back in the 30s and the 40s to have certain words in the Bible, like homosexuality, which meant actually pedophilia,
Right.
and it all comes down to like a German doctrine with a German pronunciation that was changed and put into English, and because of the mistranslation, it comes out homosexuality rather than sexual abuse on a child.
Right.
And, and it's tough, right? And my dad still we're building a bridge, he didn't come to my wedding, and his reasoning behind it was that he wasn't going to compromise his faith and his acceptance into heaven. So I was like, "Okay." And then shortly after that, we had a conversation again, and he's like, "Well, it's like your relationship with Aaron's like pedophilia and a woman pastor." And I was like, "Okay, so first of all, women pastor." I'm like, "Is that where you're stuck?" I'm like, "You think that women can't have a gift from God in order to be able to share something that God has spoken or put or impressed on their heart and get out there and speak about it?" I'm like, "That is crazy." I'm like,
Well, I mean,
"First of
think
all."
about the woman at the well. You know
Yeah,
what I mean? She went back and told her, and like everybody that she told believe like she was the first big evangelist and she
it's
was a woman.
ridiculous. I know. And I was like, it's convenient that that's kinda how that goes because, my mom
Mhm.
was quite a strong person in her career, and then she loved God and she shared it, and, it was fine then, and I'm like, "But now all of a sudden it's different," and I'm like, it's weird how, we in even in our church culture, we go through these different, like, phases and waves, you know?
Well, we're growing and we're evolving. Christians really don't like that word because
Yeah.
it, makes them kind of go, wait, a minute, that's the Bible and it's history and it's truth. And it is a beautiful book,
Mhm.
but a lot of it is symbolism.
It
A lot
is.
of it is mystical. It's stories that are just kind of as old as time, like that
Mhm.
help you realize how you can connect with God. And
Yeah.
to me, when we take it as this is it, it doesn't make sense because you think about Lot's wife. She
Yeah.
turned back. She turned back and turned into a pillar of salt,
Mhm.
right? What so that I've heard many, many pastors say to
Yeah.
me, don't ever look back. Just look forward, 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 right? And yet the entire message of Christianity is we need to look back constantly and live by the rules of this book that was
Correct.
written
Yeah.
2,000 years ago. And the whole message, but then they also have the message of don't look back, and I'm like, which is it?
It's contradictory.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
very contradictory. And it's also like, I think the whole point, even Jesus talked about the new wineskins and the old wines,
Mhm.
you can't pour new wine into old wineskins and
Yeah.
vice, you know what I mean? You've
I
got
know.
to go forward, keep going forward. And that's how we grow as a community and, as population, we grow forward, not
Mhm.
backwards. And
No.
so things change as we start to realize, and I also think about how in the Bible they talk about the verses that say white as snow.
Yeah. Yeah.
It didn't snow in the Middle East.
It's so
They
weird.
didn't know what snow was. It's like so think about that. They changed that word to match this. But, so the little teeny things like that started to sort of add up. I was like, okay,
Mhm.
so this is an important book. And I'm not discrediting that,
No, yeah.
but it's one of many.
So what
And
was your day then? Like, when you were like, "You know what? I love God." I mean, because I know that you come from quite a staunch religious background yourself,
oh
and
yeah,
then,
yeah,
I mean, this is the reason for your podcast.
yeah.
And where was it for you where you were like, "Enough's enough"?
I mean, it was kind of a process, but I mean, I would say my first question started on Survivor in 2007.
Oh,
You
yeah,
know,
that's right, I was
when I had this gay Mormon
watch
flight
that.
attendant who
Yeah.
was like my child. I love him. Still to this day love him. And I started asking
You
questions
had him on
about
your
the
podcast too, didn't you?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Yes,
Episode
yes.
4, I believe.
Yeah.
It was so good. And hearing his story, he's also written the forward for my book. We're still very close.
So
But Todd's life, he was struggling to fit into his religious community. And so I think that started by, and then 2016, when I saw the way the evangelical church was sort of hopping into bed with politics,
mhm.
that's kind of when I started really pulling away because it didn't make sense. And then I don't know, I think moving from the Bible Belt of the United States, where I was a Christian
Okay.
radio host, to Utah and living as a minority now. I was in the minority religion all of a sudden and meeting these people who are in this other religion who act
Yeah.
an awful lot like we did.
Yeah,
So I
but
was
there's
like, wait a minute. I thought
there's
this was a cult. And then I was like, wait, was I in a cult? Like, I don't know. Like,
True,
I started
yeah.
to realize, oh my gosh, there's so many religions and they all think they're right. So
Mhm.
either everybody's right or everybody's wrong.
Hmm.
And I realized that connection that we have with God is just given to us.
Yeah, it is.
If you have breath, you have the divine in you. You don't have to go to church to know that. But church tells us that we do. And it feels good. I mean, I'm not putting it down. It doesn't work for me, but it did for a long time because it was my community, it was my
Mhm.
language, it was what I spoke.
A safety
But
net too.
now but now I'm looking for community. I'm actually going to start building community with people who've left, many of them the
Yeah.
Mormon church here in my area. I'm actually going to a meeting tonight to learn more about how they do it. This it's called Thrive Beyond Religion. Have you heard of this? I
Oh,
think they're in
okay.
Canada.
Yeah, so I think that's, Imagine Dragons from Utah.
Hmm.
They're quite a big American band, one of my
Hmm.
favorites. Same thing, there he's in a midst of deconstructing, and
Hmm.
he had a crisis of faith, and that was kinda my first exposure as well, where he was like, "But if God is love, and, we're supposed to express love, first of all, in just alone in just the gay community, how is the church not accepting it?" And he was, I guess, just kinda went on a campaign, and I saw, and I think that was a part of what they were doing too.
Yeah, and the Mormon Stories podcast is a
Okay.
really big podcast. I mean, millions of followers, I think.
Yeah.
And it's just people who are leaving that religion sharing their stories. And so they kind of helped start Thrive, but they're no longer, the podcast is kind of separate from it.
Mhm.
But the people who are running it, it's just amazing. It's a way to really still have connection, make an impact in the community. Cause, that's
That's the thing.
important.
Yeah, it
I
is.
think it's so important that we do what we can to help
Yeah,
those in need in our areas.
very
And
true.
so I wanna do that here, but I'm not putting church down, I'm just saying, um, religion for me, it doesn't work anymore,
No.
but it got me to this place. So
And that's the thing, like, for me, same thing, like, the affirming church that I've attended, I do appreciate that platform and what they do, and I know that it's genuine, and they have an open door policy, and if you have any questions, the leaders, there's pastors who are up there preaching who are in
yeah,
same-sex relationships. Um, but for me, the setup, the worship, the teachings, and certain things like that for me are don't quite hit home. Like in church, you back in the day, you go church shopping, so you find which church fits for you, right? And
yeah,
in our community where we're deconstructing and don't conform to the social norms and Christian norms or church norms, there really isn't a community where we can go together, because I do miss community. I do miss the times when, men's groups and Bible studies and different events that were, you'd meet friends and you meet people and you become a part of a family. I don't That's one thing that I do miss on that side and have kind of almost, when I say moving 2 feet forward, 1 foot back, I'm like, "You know what? Maybe if I just go to one of these very charismatic churches where they have that powerful worship and that I love so much, and I just, take what I need." But then I'm like, "Well, that's kinda hypocritical because then I'm
Yeah.
sitting in this church and I'm really not believing everything you're saying because all really isn't all welcome, and there is a lot of politics and there's a lot of undercurrent that, I don't agree with." So yeah, you're right. Having a community is huge. I think
It's
it's
so important, and I think that's part of one of the biggest hurdles in deconstruction is
mhm.
making sure that you are connected to a community, and, the first thing that people in church ask, "Are you in fellowship?"
Yeah, right.
I
I
call that
know.
the F word.
Yeah.
It's like, that's so triggering to hear that word, I don't know why, but I'm like, "Oh, yeah,
Well,
you're
it
just
kind of
hanging
almost
out."
felt like they were, yeah, fellowship was more like having somebody like Big Brother watching over you almost just to
Yeah,
make
I
sure that
mean,
you're
making
staying
sure
straight.
your beliefs are still
Yep.
in alignment with the overall message of whatever religion you're in. And I get it. I mean, I get it. It's just I don't know if it's for me,
Yeah. No,
and
no.
it
Same
was
with me.
though
It's not.
for a long
Yeah.
time. And I'm thankful for
Yeah.
those years of my life. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, and that's kinda how I feel about, like, my life story, about all the pain and hurt that I went through, and some people say to me, like, with your drug addiction and sexual abuse, and there are gaps in between that I really didn't get into on detail, that were pretty dark, and there were a lot of times where I think that a lot of people would have just rolled over and given up and said, "Well, you know what? This is just my life, or I'm going to end it." And I remember coming out. I started my podcast, the Gary My podcast, and it was probably about 2 or 3 weeks before that, and I was like, "Holy man, I just don't know if I can continue to do this. I
Mm.
don't know." I was going to a church that, very Hillsong-ish here in Calgary, C3, and, I didn't know how I felt. I mean, the church is great. The people are lovely. I have good friends that go to that church still, that I go to gym with and talk to on a regular basis. I just didn't feel like I belonged, and there was a moment in my life where I was, like, questioning everything. I was like, "Maybe this is a sin. Maybe I am living in sin. Maybe, I'm trying to fight this current, and this like whitewater rapid just seems to be getting swelled up because there's all this rain, all this stuff keeps on happening to me. And why does this stuff keep happening to me?" And I turned into like a, well, that's just me. Woe is me attitude. And I was like, well, something happens. I'm like, oh yeah, typical. And my language to myself was so nasty. And I was like, you know what?
Yeah.
And I was so angry at God and I was angry at everybody and I just couldn't feel anymore. And I was like, wow,
How'd you
I
come out
have
of
to do
that?
something. I pushed record.
Started your podcast.
I started my podcast.
Very
Really loved it.
therapeutic, isn't it?
It was. And honestly, I thought it was going to be a memoir. I thought it was going to be something that I was going to leave my loved ones behind. And it was going to be left in a little note. And I was going to be like, hey, these are my last words. This is my life story. At least now. But as I started to speak about it, and it was quite funny because before I was I come out of like a job and financially wasn't set up for anything. And my last cry out to God was, I'm like, okay, I'm ready for you to take me home. I'm done. I don't want to do this anymore. Wherever home is, wherever peace is, wherever I can just not anymore. Like just, and, I had toyed with an idea of, like, podcast, book, whatever else, and God's like, "Purchase the equipment," and he's like, "I got the rest." And I
Mhm.
was like, "Well, I
Yeah.
can't really afford it right now." I'm like, "I should be doing other things." And, because I was already planning kind of in a sense where I was like, "Okay, I got a couple debts I gotta figure out. I gotta make sure that when I leave, I'm at 0, that I'm not leaving anybody
Mhm.
behind with any kind of burdens." So I was doing all that already, like, my wheels were into motion. And, got, like, buy the equipment, and I'm like, "But then that's just putting me further into away from what I wanna do." Anyways, went online, bought all my stuff, like, literally Amazon, the magic of showed up a day or 2 later, and I plugged everything in, and, I just started talking, and then it just became like therapy. And then I was like, wow, okay, I just got to keep doing this. And I don't know,
You're a
here it is.
verbal processor. You
It,
needed to get it out.
I did. I
That's
did.
beautiful. So your podcast basically saved your life.
It did. It did.
Wow.
Um, and then all of a sudden it started the same as you. And then I started to evolve into talking to other people with crazy stories and impactful and finding out their whys. And it's not only specifically about a God track. It was about
Yeah.
like, how did you get through it? And just kind of everyone sharing their stories and overcoming. And as I was doing that, obviously I started to like want to read books. So I started to read books on trauma, and then
Mhm.
I was like, well, maybe I should go get some, psychology, and find out if I could speak to a therapist and see what that looks like. And my very first time sitting down with her, she's like, so you've got a brick wall. And she's like,
Yeah.
we're going to have to start taking this off. And
She
I was
called
like,
you out.
yeah, she did. And it was quite funny because she started talking about energies and
Mhm.
talking about like holistic healing and about God as a creator and the universe and just how we're all connected and how we've always been connected and grounded. And like it's not something like you said too, and then you echoed it, is like it's not something that was gifted to us because we did an act of baptism.
Yeah.
We were born this way. We were created as a little seed. He knew us inside of our mom's womb.
Yeah.
And I was like, and I started to hear that more, and I started to accept myself. And yeah, it was quite a process. And then you came along, your podcast, and I was like, oh, and it's kind of weird once you get into life and doing the things that you need to do, like putting in the hard work, because it is a
Mhm.
lot of hard work.
Yeah, it
And
is.
it's in it, there's, without toxic positivity that's involved in all of it, um, it's tough because
Mhm.
there's a lot of questioning. And then when you start unpacking, it gets uncomfortable first, really
Oh,
uncomfortable.
yeah, totally. Well, I mean, it's the thing that you have based your entire life on.
Yeah.
Is this particular way of looking at God or
Hmm.
eternity or whatever. And I think just knowing, I mean, the only thing we know for sure is that we have right now. We
Yeah.
have right now. What are we
Exactly.
doing to leave the world a better place? None of us get
Mhm.
to live forever, not here
No.
in this time. Um, so what are we doing to make the world better?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I think especially for me and maybe many people who are in the faith that I was in, it was all about going to heaven when you die. It wasn't
Mhm.
really,
Yeah. It
and
was the
making sure that
destination, right? It was not
yeah,
about, yeah.
the journey, which is why I call this honoring the journey because
Yeah.
we don't do that very well when we're
Mhm.
only focused on what's
Yeah.
next
Yeah.
because all we're promised is what's right here,
And who's to say that this isn't already heaven and that we can't
right?
live it here now? And,
Who knows?
we have these people who are telling us otherwise, that we have to do all the certain things, jump through the certain hoops, and, obey certain laws. And like you said, tithe and do all the things so that God can check his little box like a site supervisor on a build site and be like, okay, yeah, there's the wall, there's the foundation, where we had given all of that from day one. And it's
Mhm,
it's like they deconstructed us by what I feel for me was a whole bunch of smoke and mirrors and deception, which was hard because at 33, when I realized, hey, I am attracted to men, I'm attracted to women too, but I've never been happy enough to want to make a go of it and get
mhm,
married, have a life and everything else. Let me just see what this is. And I remember my first time like going on to like, back then was, I think it was Match.com. We didn't have all these Tinder stuff that they have these days, luckily. And it was like actual write an email and have a little profile and talk it out. And I remember speaking to Aaron, and it was just right away we hit it off. And he's the same thing. He grew up in the Catholic Church, and
mm.
to this day, he still very much struggles. Like he's like, me and God are cool. He's like, I just don't know how to forgive. And I'm like, yeah, that's a tough one, right? Like, and that's his journey. And
Mhm.
I can do my journey and kind of just feel connected the way that I feel connected, and just share that with him in times without pushing him too far off
Yeah.
the other side, right?
Well, I do think, we kinda grow up thinking everybody needs to look at life the way we do.
Yeah,
And when you let go of that, you're able to just share your journey without feeling like everybody's gotta
right.
join in with you.
Yeah, because
You
that's what we grew up like, where
Yeah,
we had to push the agenda,
yeah, yeah.
you know, and that became a part of our mandate where we were like, "This is what God is saying. The more people that sit in the pews, the better." You
Mhm.
know, and that was a hard one too, where I when I got out of that, I was like, "Well, why am I not sharing the word anymore? I'm not talking about, how
Mm.
God saved me from being such a bad person." And I'm like, "Well, I never really was a bad person. The circumstances were bad, but I wasn't a bad person. I was lost, sure, but I didn't have to be saved because I'm already saved. I don't have to go anywhere. It doesn't have to repair anything. I just have to
Yeah.
figure out, my healing path." And it was like, yeah, that's where we
Wow.
are.
Well, that's amazing. Your story, I'm sure, resonated with quite a few people
I hope
because I
so.
think there's a lot of people that are still kind of wrestling, like, is this a sin? Am I a sinner? And
Mhm.
what does this mean? And what would you say to somebody who's kind of in that space right now? What would you tell them?
I would say what worked for me is only I can only speak to what I did, and what I found made me get through to the other side was find a time to be quiet, be still, lie on the ground if you have to, get a yoga mat, close your door, but be quiet. Just listen to yourself and listen to what I did was listen to my pain, listen to my hurt, and then all I did was say, "God, this is what's for me in my religion was I'm like, I just need to know that you are real. And I need
Mm.
to know that outside of all the rules and everything else that you meet me for where I am." And he did. And it wasn't even a question. It was a right away, not even like, some people they talk about like this audible voice and they talk about all these big things and very spiritual moments. But for me, it was just a matter of, okay, put
It
in the
was
work.
like a knowing,
It was
like
just
a
a
knowing.
knowing. It was
Yeah.
just a silent, strong knowing. And it was like, okay, now I got to do the work. And that's what it is you have to make sure that you do the work. A lot of people want to get the aha moment without actually putting in the actual, grit that it takes to deconstruct and to search your happiness and search your truth. And if you are questioning, is there a source, then why don't you ask the source directly if there is a source?
Hmm. Interesting.
Yeah.
That's actually really good advice. Just honestly, I do believe that God's voice, spirit's voice, whatever you call source
Hmm.
is still and small.
It is.
And when we're still and quiet is
Right.
when we have the most success in connecting with that.
Yeah.
So
100%. And I
beautiful.
think that's why we're so, I guess, like mind without a better word, I was gonna say mind effed, but I'm not gonna say that on here.
Yeah.
But we like the social media,
Oh yeah.
commercials, advertising, everything's so noisy. Everything's just so much noise going on that we have no time to sit in ourself and actually just like look inward and just, we're like, "Oh, I'm too busy. I can't." And like when we even meditate or we start to like meditate or like to manifest or whatever people like to do in order to bring into their life, 2 minutes feels like a lifetime. You're just
Yeah,
like,
it does.
"How do I sit here?" Right?
Yeah.
And I think that's how we've been machined so that we don't actually hear that strong, still voice.
Mm. Beautiful. Well, thank you, Gary. And
Thank you, Leslie.
I have really enjoyed getting to know you and hearing
Me
your
too.
your journey. I honor your journey, and I thank
Thank
you
you.
for reaching out and for just sharing it so openly and honestly. And um, I think you're yet another example of how the pain in our lives
Mhm.
can sometimes bring eventually the
Yeah,
most beauty.
yeah.
It's amazing how far you've come. And
Thank you.
really, and doing it in a way I think that honors not only those around you, um, but also yourself. So
Yeah, yeah, and I think
nicely
that's
done,
it.
Gary.
Thank you, Leslie. Nicely done to you too. Thank you.
Oh,
I
thanks.
honestly say, like I said before, thank you very much for your podcast. It has been an honor to be here today and to share my heart. And I know that what you're doing is powerful work. And in the times when we doubt ourselves is exactly when we need to actually lean in. And That's what we do as fellow podcasters. It's not easy. Sometimes it's raw. We expose ourselves, right?
Yeah, we
And I
do.
thank you for your and I thanks for your heart too.
Thanks. I appreciate that. Like it feels really, really vulnerable.
Yeah, it
You
sure
know,
is.
it really does, but it
Mhm.
but it also feels really, really right. So
Yeah, yeah. There's a
I
lot of
can't
reward in
not
it
do
too.
it.
I know, and that's the thing. It's like, and there's the moments when you feel like a little guilty when you're not into it. You're like, oh, I have to check myself here because I
Yeah.
actually get to do this. This is such an honor and an opportunity.
Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
yeah.
Well, and speaking of your podcast, I will put a link in the show notes. So if you want to
Awesome.
check out Gary's podcast and hear some of the stories that he's out there sharing, that would be awesome. And Gary, thank you so much. We
Thank you
appreciate
so
you
much.
today.
Thanks, Leslie.